I was standing in my kitchen that morning, stirring my tea the way I always do, when I noticed something strange about Elena, the woman who cleaned my house every Thursday. She wasn't dusting the shelves or wiping the counter like she normally did. No. She was watching me, quietly, intently, as if every small movement of mine was some kind of clue she was trying to decipher. I felt a cold shiver crawl across my shoulders, the kind you get when someone stands too close without touching you. I tried to brush it off, but her eyes lingered just a little too long. For the past 6 months, Elena had been punctual, discreet, and almost invisible in the house. I appreciated that quality. God knows, at my age, I don't need extra noise. But that day, something was different. She didn't move with her usual gentle steps. Instead, she seemed restless, pacing more than cleaning, her gaze drifting toward the hallway where my husband's study used to be. She glanced at it repeatedly, as if expecting someone to walk out. But my husband had been dead for a year. No one else lived here. And yet she kept looking. I pretended to read the newspaper, though the words blurred before my eyes. My attention stayed fixed on her reflection in the window. I saw her lean in slightly toward the closed study door, almost pressing her ear against it. My heart skipped. There was no reason for her to be near that room. I kept it locked. That room had been untouched since my husband passed away. Even I hadn't had the courage to step inside. But somehow, Elena seemed drawn to it, as if something inside was calling her. Eventually, I cleared my throat and asked if everything was all right. She startled. Actually startled, dropping the cloth she held. Her face went pale, and she forced a nervous smile, insisting she was fine. But I recognized the look in her eyes, recognition mixed with fear. It was the same look people gave at funerals when someone mentions a secret everyone suspected but never dared to confirm. She quietly retrieved her cloth, but her hands trembled, betraying her lie. She finished cleaning faster than usual that day, barely making eye contact as she gathered her supplies. When she left, I followed her to the door, and just before stepping out, she turned to me with a softness that felt wrong, like pity. She whispered, "Señora, some things in old houses should not stay hidden forever." And before I could respond, she was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving her words suspended in the hallway like smoke. I stood there motionless, gripping the doorknob as chills ran down my spine. How could she know anything about secrets in this house? How could she know about the study I had never opened since my husband died? And why did her voice sound as if she wasn't warning me, but preparing me? That night, I barely slept. Elena's last words kept echoing in my mind. Something in my house wasn't just hidden. It was waiting to be found. The next morning, the house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed Elena's words during the night. I moved slowly from room to room, pretending I had reasons to rearrange blankets or straighten picture frames, when, in truth, I was just avoiding the hallway that led to my husband's study. It's funny how a simple sentence from a stranger can disturb the dust over memories you thought were buried for good. Some things in old houses should not stay hidden forever. The phrase pulsed in the back of my mind like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Eventually, of course, I found myself standing in front of that door. The same door I had walked past hundreds of times in the last year, always pretending it wasn't there. My husband, Richard, used to spend hours inside, scribbling in notebooks, making phone calls with the door half closed, always telling me not to worry about boring work things. After he died, I locked the room and kept the key in a small porcelain dish inside my nightstand. I told myself I was preserving his memory. But now I began to wonder if I had actually been protecting myself from the truth. I placed my fingers on the doorknob. It felt colder than metal should feel, as if it had been waiting untouched for centuries instead of months. For a moment, I almost turned it, forgetting it was locked, driven by a sudden wave of stubbornness. Then I stopped. My breathing was shallow, and my knees felt weak. I was an old woman standing in a hallway, afraid of a room in her own house. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but the sound died in my throat. There was nothing funny about the heavy silence pressing from the other side. I stepped back, retreated to my bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed like a student called to the principal's office. I opened the nightstand drawer and stared at the porcelain dish. The key lay there, small and ordinary, glinting faintly under the light. I hadn't touched it in a year. Not once. I had kept it as a symbol of my refusal, my stubborn loyalty to the version of my husband I wanted to remember. The devoted partner. The hard-working man. The man who held my hand in the dark when fear visited me at night. Not the man whose secrets might be living behind that locked door. My hand hovered over the key, trembling slightly. I could hear Richard's voice in my head, gentle and amused, the way it used to be when I worried too much. You always overthink, Margaret. Some things are better left alone. But Elena's voice came back too, stronger now, wrapping around us like a vine around a tree. Some things in old houses should not stay hidden forever. Two ghosts arguing inside my mind. One telling me to leave the past where it lay. The other nudging me, almost pushing me, toward the truth. At last, with a sigh that felt like surrender, I picked up the key. The metal warmed quickly in my palm, as if it had been waiting for my touch all along. I didn't open the door that day. No, I was not that brave yet. Instead, I placed the key on the small table in the hallway, right beside the study door. A silent promise to myself. I would go in. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because the worst kind of fear is not of what's behind a door, it's of knowing that, deep down, something behind it already knows you're coming. That night, long after the neighborhood had settled into its usual quiet, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I tried to distract myself with the ticking of the clock, with the hum of the refrigerator, with the distant sound of a car passing down the street, but nothing drowned out the tension brewing in my chest. It felt as though Elena's warning had awakened something inside the house, something that had been patient for far too long. I rolled onto my side, shut my eyes tightly, and tried to force myself to sleep. But the moment silence fell, I heard it. It was faint at first. A soft creak, like the slow bending of wood. Houses make noises, especially old ones like mine. I told myself that. I repeated it over and over. But this sound, this one didn't belong to the house's natural breathing. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost expectant. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness. The noise came again, an unmistakable shuffle, followed by a dull thump, as though something had moved or someone had. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The sound was coming from the hallway. My first instinct was denial. I thought maybe I had imagined it, or that a draft had pushed something off a shelf. But the second instinct, the older, wiser one cultivated from years of sensing when something in life was off, pushed me upright in bed. I listened carefully. No creaking floorboards. No footsteps. Just the tension of silence holding its breath. I forced myself to stand. My knees protested, and my back ached as I reached for my robe, but fear makes you move even when your bones don't want to. I stepped into the hallway, each foot sinking softly into the carpet runner. The dim night light near the bathroom cast a faint amber glow, stretching long shadows across the walls. For a moment, everything seemed still. Too still. I walked slowly, afraid of breaking whatever fragile truce existed between myself and the darkness. And that's when I noticed it, the key. The key I had placed on the small table earlier that day. It wasn't lying flat anymore. It was turned, just slightly, as if someone had picked it up and set it back down in a hurry. A cold wave rushed through my body. My breath trembled as I reached out and traced the outline of the table's polished surface. I tried to find a logical explanation, maybe the vibration from a passing truck, maybe a slip of my own memory. But deep down I knew with the same instinct a mother has when something is wrong with her child. Someone had touched the key. Someone who had no reason to be near it. And there was only one door that key opened, the study. My husband's sanctuary. The room Elena had been staring at. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed from behind the locked door, so loud and abrupt that I gasped and stumbled back. My hand flew to my mouth, heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was unmistakable. Something or someone had moved inside the study. I stared at the door, frozen, waiting for another noise. But none came, only silence. A deep, unnerving silence that stretched through the hallway and pulled at the edges of my sanity. That night, I didn't go back to bed. I sat in the hallway until morning, clutching that turned key like a lifeline, knowing that whatever was happening in my house had only just begun. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains as if the night's terror had been nothing but imagination. But the moment I opened my eyes, the memory of the thud behind the study door slammed into me with brutal clarity. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples, trying to convince myself that I hadn't heard what I knew I had heard. Age can play tricks on the mind, yes, but not like that. Not with a sound so heavy it vibrated through the floorboards. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and forced myself to breathe, even as the house felt colder than usual, as though something inside resented the dawn. As I shuffled toward the kitchen, my gaze drifted to the table in the hallway where the key still rested. It lay in the same strange position I'd found it in during the night. Tilted. Disturbed. A key doesn't tilt by itself. That thought followed me like a shadow as I prepared my breakfast. My hands shook so much I spilled the tea twice. I sat at the table, gripping the warm mug like it was the only real thing grounding me to the world. Every sound, every creak, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made my heart skip. I was alert in a way I hadn't been in years. As I stared blankly at the wall, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't allowed myself to revisit since Richard died. A memory of the last night he spent in that study. He had come out pale, sweating, his usually calm eyes darting around the room. When I'd asked if he was all right, he snapped at me, something he'd never done in all our decades together. "Don't go in there, Margaret. Ever." He'd said it with such force it shook me. After that, he spent 2 days avoiding me, speaking in half sentences, checking the locks repeatedly, jumping at small noises. I had convinced myself it was stress, maybe illness, but now, remembering his fear, chills climbed up my spine. I pushed away the memory, but it refused to stay buried. If Richard had been afraid of something in that room, then what had I been protecting all this time by keeping it locked? His secrets? Or myself? The fear in his eyes that night suddenly made sense in a terrible, sinking way. Perhaps he hadn't been protecting his work or his privacy. Perhaps he had been protecting me. And if that was true, what did that say about the journal Elena had hinted at? What did that say about the noise I heard last night? Unable to sit still, I walked back to the hallway. Every step felt heavier, each one echoing a truth I didn't want to face. I stood once more before the closed study door. My hand hovered over the key, which lay waiting on the table like a silent invitation or a warning. I pressed my palm against the cold wood. It felt different this time. Not just cold, but humming faintly, almost like the quiet vibration of a hidden heartbeat pulsing from within. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, terrified of what opening that door might reveal, but equally terrified of what ignoring it might cost me. In that moment, I realized something with painful clarity. Whatever was happening in this house had roots in Richard's final days. And the woman cleaning my home, the one who had been watching me so intently, knew far more than she had admitted. The room wasn't just a room. It was a vault of secrets. My husband's secrets. My marriage's secrets. Maybe even secrets about myself. And the longer I hesitated, the stronger the feeling grew that something inside that room was waiting, listening, and growing impatient. Thursday arrived, and with it came the strange comfort of routine. For 6 months, Elena had arrived every Thursday at 9 o'clock sharp, her footsteps soft, her presence barely noticeable. But that morning, the house remained still. No doorbell. No quiet humming from the hallway. No rustling of cleaning supplies. I checked the clock, 9:05. Then 9:20. By 9:45, a knot had formed in my stomach. Elena had never been late, not once. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. And the house, already suffocating with unanswered questions, felt even heavier without her silent presence. I tried calling the agency she worked for, but the line rang endlessly without response. I thought of calling my daughter, but she would only tell me I was imagining things again. Ever since Richard died, she treated me like a fragile vase, something to be moved carefully and never trusted to stand on its own. No, she wouldn't understand. She didn't see the way Elena had looked at the study door. She hadn't heard the sound behind it. She hadn't felt the weight of Richard's final warning. This was not something I could explain over the phone. This was something only I could face. I wandered through the house, each room echoing with questions I didn't yet know how to ask. I paused in the living room where Elena usually started her cleaning. Her feather duster still hung in the closet, its soft bristles untouched since the week before. That simple sight, a tool waiting for hands that never came, filled me with a strange sadness. As much as she had unsettled me, I had grown used to her presence, perhaps even dependent on it. She was the only other soul who walked these halls. And now, she too was gone. Then a thought struck me, an intrusive one that made me feel foolish yet terrified. What if she hadn't returned because she knew I had heard the noise? What if she had been keeping watch on the study for a reason? What if her sudden absence wasn't an accident, but a retreat? My mind spiraled. Had she found something in the house? Had she discovered something about Richard? Or worse, had she been connected to whatever haunted that locked room? The possibilities tangled in my chest like thorns. I tried to steady myself, but the fear only deepened. To distract myself, I cleaned the kitchen. Or rather, I pretended to clean it. I wiped surfaces that were already spotless. I rearranged items that didn't need rearranging. But all the while, I kept glancing down the hallway, toward the study door. Noon arrived, then afternoon, then evening, and still no sign of Elena. I reheated my tea 3 times, unable to drink more than a sip. My hands trembled as shadows lengthened across the walls. Night was approaching, and with it came the memory of the sound, the shuffle, the thud, the unmistakable presence. I dreaded facing it again alone. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was pacing the hallway. The key glimmered faintly in the dim light, taunting me. It no longer felt like a simple object. It felt like a question demanding an answer. And with Elena gone, the weight of that question pressed entirely onto my shoulders. I couldn't shake the feeling that her absence was somehow pushing me forward, nudging me closer to the truth. Whether out of fear, or desperation, or an old woman's stubborn determination, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, I would open that door. Because if I waited any longer, I feared the secrets inside might decide to come to me first. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake with the image of the study door in my mind, dark, silent, waiting. By dawn, I was exhausted, shaky, and strangely resolute. Fear can paralyze you, yes, but after enough time, it hardens into a different kind of energy. A stubbornness. A refusal to be pushed around by ghosts, memories, or secrets. As the early light crept through the curtains, I stood up, wrapped my robe around me, and walked toward the hallway with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Today, the door would open. No more delays. No more pretending the house wasn't whispering around me. The hallway was cold, colder than any other part of the house. My slippers slid softly over the floor as I approached the small table where the key waited. For a moment, I simply stared at it, lying there innocently, unaware of the storm it represented. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for it. The metal felt strangely warm, too warm, as though it had been held recently. But I forced myself not to think about that. I closed my fingers around it, inhaled deeply, and turned toward the study door. My pulse beat so hard in my neck I could feel it against my collarbone. The key slid into the lock with a softness that unnerved me. I expected resistance, a stubborn mechanism, a rusty click, but no. It turned smoothly, almost gracefully, as if someone had oiled it recently. I froze, fingers tight around the key. I hadn't touched that lock in a year. Richard certainly hadn't touched it since the night he'd warned me away. So, who had made it so compliant? I swallowed hard and, with a slow exhale, pushed the door open. It creaked, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the gentle sigh of something long confined finally breathing again. The smell hit me first. Not dust or stale air, but something else, something sharp, metallic, mixed with a faint sweetness I couldn't place. It made my skin prickle. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning softly beneath me. The curtains were drawn, leaving the room dim, but not completely dark. Enough light filtered through to cast long shadows across the walls, touching familiar shapes. Richard's desk, his leather chair, the old bookshelf. Yet everything felt subtly rearranged, as though the room had shifted in my absence. Not drastically, just enough for my instincts to whisper, "Something has been here." My gaze slowly scanned the room. Papers lay stacked neatly on the desk, though I remembered them being disorganized the last time I saw them. A small lamp had been moved from the left side to the right. Even the chair seemed angled differently. These were small things, tiny details, but the kind a wife notices after decades of living in harmony with another person's habits. Richard was predictable in his routines. Everything had its place. And seeing them altered, even slightly, filled me with a deep, unsettling suspicion. Someone had been in this room recently. Someone who knew how to move quietly. Then my eyes fell on something that made my breath hitch. A journal. A thick, navy blue, leather-bound journal sitting directly in the center of the desk. Richard's handwriting sprawled across the cover in gold ink. "Private. Do not open." I knew that journal. I had seen it once years ago, pressed under his arm as he walked through the house. He'd snapped it shut the moment he realized I'd noticed. I never saw it again after that. And now, here it was, placed as though someone wanted me to find it. My legs felt weak as I stepped toward the desk, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it might drown out the truth waiting inside those pages. My fingers hovered above the journal, trembling, hesitant, almost afraid to touch it. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would change everything. The words on the cover, "Private, do not open," seemed to pulse under the thin layer of dust, as if Richard himself were whispering them into my ear. For a moment, I closed my eyes and breathed in deeply, remembering his voice, the warmth of his laugh, the gentle steadiness of his hands. But that memory felt fractured now, like a photo left too long under the sun. There were cracks I hadn't noticed before, shadows I had ignored. Finally, with a mixture of dread and resolve, I pulled the journal toward me. It was heavier than I expected, uncomfortably so, almost as if it resisted being moved. The leather felt cold under my fingertips, dry and stiff like old skin. I sat down slowly in Richard's chair, its worn cushions sighing under my weight. It felt strange, wrong, even, to sit where he had sat countless times, scribbling secrets into this very book. I opened the cover carefully, half expecting something to leap out, or for the pages to crumble into dust. But they didn't. Instead, they lay pristine, untouched, waiting. The first page was dated 6 years ago. Richard had written in a hurried scrawl, his usually neat handwriting jagged and uneven. "I think she knows." That was the first sentence. No explanation. No context. Just those 4 words that hit me like a punch to the stomach. I frowned, flipping to the next line. "The arrangement has become dangerous." Arrangement? My breath caught in my throat. What arrangement? Richard was a simple man, quiet, organized, predictable. Or so I had believed. The more I read, the more my hands shook. "She keeps watching the house. I don't know how much she suspects." My eyes darted to the door, suddenly aware of every creak and distant sound. Who had been watching? I turned the page, feeling a sickening swirl in my stomach. The words grew darker, more frantic. "If anything happens to me, Margaret cannot find out. She must be protected." Protected? Protected from what? Protected from whom? Each line pulled me deeper into a reality I didn't recognize. This wasn't the voice of the man I had shared a life with. This was the voice of someone hunted, terrified, unraveling. A part of me wanted to slam the journal shut, run out of the room, and pretend I had never seen it. But my eyes kept moving. My heart kept pushing. Truth, once awakened, refuses to sleep again. As I flipped further, I found a page that made my blood run cold. Elena came again today. I froze. My chest tightened so fast I had to set the journal down for a moment. Elena? The same woman who cleaned my house now? But the date on the page was from years before I ever met her. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue. She keeps asking questions about the house. I told her the basement is off limits.
She didn't like that.
I think she knows about the study. My fingertips went numb. Something inside me twisted sharply, a knot of fear, confusion, and betrayal. Richard had known Elena long before she became my cleaner, and he hadn't told me.
Why?
I turned the next page too quickly, the corner tearing slightly. Another line awaited me, one that stole the breath from my lungs. If she ever speaks to Margaret, everything will fall apart. I felt suddenly faint, gripping the edges of the desk as the room tilted around me. What did Elena know? Why had she been watching me? Why had she vanished without warning? And why, after all these years, did she return to clean my house as if she had never met Richard? A deep unease settled into my bones. I closed the journal slowly, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Whatever secrets my husband had taken to his grave were buried in far darker soil than I had ever imagined. For the first time in years, I walked through my home not as its owner, but as a stranger. Every corner felt suspicious. Every shadow felt charged with secrets I had lived beside without knowing. Richard's journal had left a storm inside my mind, and the word that echoed louder than the rest was basement. I had never questioned the basement. It was simply a place for old holiday decorations, paint cans, dusty furniture. Or so I believed. Now, each step I took toward it felt heavier, as if the house itself were warning me to turn back. I reached the basement door slowly, running my fingers over its surface. It was plain, unremarkable, the kind of door one passes 1,000 times without thinking. Yet now, as I stood in front of it, I felt a chill seep through the wood. Richard's voice in the journal echoed like a whisper. She must stay away from the basement. I swallowed hard, staring at the doorknob as though it might twist on its own. Had Elena gone down there? Had someone else gone down there? What was Richard hiding in the one place I never cared to explore? Gathering courage, I opened the door. A cold draft met me instantly, brushing against my ankles like unseen fingers. The stairs were steep, narrow, and coated with a thin layer of dust that made the wood look frosted. I flipped the switch on the wall. Nothing. The bulb had burned out or been removed. My pulse quickened. I didn't like going downstairs, even on a good day, and now, in near darkness, it felt like stepping into the mouth of something ancient and waiting. But I had to see. I fumbled in a drawer, found a small flashlight, and headed down, the light trembling along with my hands. Each step creaked loudly, as if announcing my presence to whatever lay below. I reached the bottom, shining the flashlight around. The air was colder, heavier, almost metallic. The shelves were in their usual places, but something felt different. Items had been disturbed. A box of Christmas ornaments was shifted to the side. An old chair had been turned around. Even the jar where I kept spare nails and screws was open, its lid sitting askew. My breath quickened. Someone had definitely been here, and recently. Fear crawled up the back of my neck as I took another step forward. Then the light landed on something that made my heart lurch. Footprints. Small ones. Not large enough to be a man's. Not small enough to be a child's. A woman's, perhaps. They were faint, imprinted into the dusty floor, leading from the shelves toward the far corner of the basement. The corner I never bothered with because Richard always said it was just storage. I followed the prints cautiously, each step making my toes curl inside my slippers. The flashlight beam jittered against the wall, revealing something I had never noticed, a thin, vertical line in the concrete. A seam. A hidden door. My breath froze. I reached out and touched it. The surface felt colder than the rest of the wall, unnaturally so. I traced the outline with my finger, an almost invisible rectangle carved into the corner. It blended perfectly with the concrete, but now that I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Richard had a hidden room in our basement, a secret place he never told me about. The journal's words echoed with a clarity so sharp it hurt. If she ever speaks to Margaret, everything will fall apart. My heart hammered against my ribs as realization dawned. Whatever was behind this wall was something Richard never wanted me to find. And yet, someone else had already been here. Someone who knew exactly where to look. I stared at the seam in the concrete, unable to move, unable to breathe. A hidden room, a secret room in my own house, one Richard had kept from me for our entire marriage. The thought knotted something deep inside my chest. Marriage is built on trust, on truth, on shared life. But standing there in the cold basement, my fingers still resting on the frigid outline of a door I was never meant to know existed, I felt as though I had been living next to a stranger for decades. The air grew heavier around me, thick with betrayal and dread. I stepped back, steadying myself against a shelf. My legs trembled. The footprints stopped directly in front of the hidden entrance. Not one step further. Not one step away. Whoever had been down here had stood right where I stood now, as if contemplating whether to go inside, or perhaps listening to something on the other side. My pulse throbbed in my throat. I raised the flashlight, illuminating the faint edges of the door again. There was no handle, only a nearly invisible indentation, the kind you would use if you already knew it was there. I pressed it gently. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. Still nothing. Perhaps it was locked. Or perhaps it required something more. My mind raced back to Richard's journal. The frantic handwriting. The warnings. The fear. The basement is off limits. She keeps asking questions. If anything happens to me, my hands shook violently. I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of what I might find, or of confirming the truth I had been slowly circling. Richard had been hiding something that terrified him. Something that involved Elena. Something that involved me. And if that was the case, then this hidden room was the heart of it all. The epicenter of the secret he carried to his grave. I forced myself to take a steady breath. I couldn't open the room, not yet. I needed strength, and perhaps more than anything, I needed answers. My eyes scanned the basement again, searching for another clue, another sign. And that's when I saw it, a small metal box tucked behind the half-empty tub of paint. It was dented, rusted, and had a tiny latch holding it shut. Something about it felt deliberate, placed where someone might hope it could be found, but not too easily. With trembling hands, I grabbed the box and opened it. Inside were 3 objects: a folded photograph, a silver key, and a note. The photograph stole the breath from my lungs. It was of Richard, much younger, perhaps in his 40s, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, dark-haired, smiling in a way that made something twist in my stomach. Richard's arm was around her waist. They looked close, far too close. My heart ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. The betrayal struck deep, old wounds resurfacing even though I didn't know her name. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note. The handwriting wasn't Richard's. It was elegant, feminine. It read, "If you ever need the truth, here is the key."
E.
My knees went weak.
E. Elena.
The cleaner. The woman who had been watching me. The woman who had vanished. She had been in Richard's life long before I ever knew her name.
Why?
And what truth was she guiding me toward? I picked up the small silver key and held it under the flashlight. It was ornate, delicate, unlike any house key I'd seen. My gaze drifted to the hidden seam in the concrete wall. The keyhole was invisible, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. I swallowed hard, my breath shaking. Suddenly, the basement felt colder, darker, as if the walls leaned closer, listening. I tightened my grip on the key, feeling its weight press into my palm. Whatever was in that hidden room had been locked away for years, maybe decades. And now, piece by piece, the truth was forcing its way toward me. Whether I was ready or not didn't seem to matter anymore. Because the house, the journal, the footprints, and Elena's message all pointed in the same direction. The time had come. The secrets my husband left behind were no longer resting quietly in the dark. They were stirring. They were alive. And they were calling my name. I climbed the basement stairs, clutching the silver key so tightly it dug into my palm. The air upstairs felt lighter, yet somehow more suffocating, as though the truth I carried in my hand weighed more than any secret buried underground. I set the metal box on the dining table and stared at the photograph again. Richard standing close to that mysterious woman, her smile bright, her hand gently resting on his arm. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. It wasn't the pose of colleagues or acquaintances. It was the pose of people who shared something deeper, something hidden. My vision blurred slightly as old insecurities clawed their way back into my heart. Had I been blind all these years? Had Richard lived a double life right under my nose? I forced myself to sit down, steadying my breath. The journal had mentioned a woman, but it had never named her. Was she the one watching the house? Was she the one Richard had been so afraid of? Or was she someone else entirely? My mind swirled with possibilities, each one darker than the last. I ran my finger along the edge of the photograph, tracing Richard's face. He looked younger here, more carefree, unburdened. The Richard the first remembered from his final years was tense, distracted, even haunted at times. I used to think it was stress from work, but what if it was her? What if she was the reason for the fear that consumed him? I turned the photo over. There was writing on the back. My breath hitched as I held it closer to the light. R&E, 1998. My heart hammered in my chest. E, the same initial as the signature on the note. The same initial as Elena. But the woman in the photograph was much younger than the Elena who cleaned my house today. Could they be the same person? Or related? A daughter, a sister, a shadow passed from one generation to another? The puzzle pieces refused to fit neatly, instead forming a jagged outline that made my stomach tighten. I rubbed my temples, overwhelmed by the realization that I had never truly known the man I married. My eyes drifted to the silver key, lying on the table. It seemed almost to gleam under the light, as though it waited for me to gather the courage to use it. A part of me wanted to throw it away, lock the basement door, and pretend none of this ever happened. But the photograph, the hidden room, the frantic words in Richard's journal, they all stirred a terrible curiosity. I needed to know who that woman was. I needed to know what Richard hid in that room. Ignoring it now would feel like closing my eyes on purpose in the middle of a fire. I couldn't unsee the truth anymore. It was too late. Then, as I gathered the items back into the metal box, something slipped out from beneath the photograph, a folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed. My hands trembled as I picked it up and opened it carefully. It was a letter, written in the same feminine handwriting as the note. "If fate brings this to Margaret," it began, "then I pray she forgives me. She deserves the truth more than anyone." My throat tightened. The letter continued. Richard feared what was coming. He feared what I knew. But he loved her, even when he could not protect her. Loved me. Even amid secrets, betrayal, and hidden rooms, he had loved me. The letter trembled in my hands as tears blurred my vision. The letter ended with a chilling final line. "The truth is in the room he feared most." My stomach twisted painfully. The hidden room wasn't just a space, it was a confession chamber sealed in concrete. Everything pointed back to it. The footprints, the journal, the key, the letter, the photograph. My entire marriage now hinged on whatever lay behind that cold seam in the basement wall. I wiped my tears, squared my shoulders, and stood. Fear, betrayal, heartbreak, none of it mattered anymore. There was no turning back. The truth was waiting in that room, and I was finally ready to open the door Richard had spent a lifetime trying to keep closed. I didn't return to the basement that afternoon. I couldn't. My heart felt too fragile, like a porcelain teacup freshly cracked along the side. One wrong touch, and the whole thing might shatter. Instead, I walked through the house aimlessly, drifting from room to room like a ghost searching for meaning. Every photograph on the wall, every cushion on the sofa, every trinket Richard had brought home over the years, each one now felt tainted by secrets, by questions, by the sudden realization that the man I had loved for so long had lived a life I never truly understood. I moved slowly, touching objects not for comfort, but as if asking them silently to reveal something to me. As darkness began to seep into the windows, the house grew colder. Not the usual evening chill, but a deep, unsettling cold that crept into my bones. I turned up the thermostat, but the warmth didn't take. I wrapped myself in a shawl, yet still I shivered. It felt as though the house itself sensed what I had discovered, sensed that the hidden room's secret was rising to the surface. I found myself standing once again in the hallway outside the study, staring at the cracked open door. I had left it slightly ajar, planning to return later. But now, staring at that dark gap, I felt an unease crawl across my scalp. The air around it pressed heavier with each passing second. Then, out of nowhere, the house made a noise. Not the familiar settling of old beams or the soft ticking of the clock, but a deep groaning sound, as if the walls themselves were shifting under pressure. I froze, listening. Another groan from beneath the floorboards. Then a dull thud. My heart slammed against my chest. It was coming from below, from the basement. My breath caught as the realization hit me. I wasn't alone in the house. Or perhaps something inside the house had awakened. I took a step back, gripping the handrail of the stairs, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. For a long moment, I simply stood there, listening as the sounds faded into silence once more. My mind raced with explanations, rational ones, irrational ones, excuses, possibilities. Maybe the foundation was settling. Maybe an animal had gotten inside. Maybe my nerves were frayed from everything I had learned. But no matter what excuse I tried to cling to, one thought kept pushing to the forefront. Something, or someone, was in the basement. And they were not trying to stay quiet anymore. The hidden room had a presence, a weight, an awareness that seemed to press upward through the floorboards. I walked to the living room to distract myself, sitting in Richard's old armchair. It still held his shape, his scent, a mixture of cedar and coffee. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, hoping it would comfort me. But the scent, once a source of warmth, now filled me with dread. What had he been doing in that room? Why had he built it? Why had he never trusted me with the truth? My mind returned to the photograph, the letter, the journal entries dripping with paranoia, Elena's cryptic warnings. A deep ache formed in my chest as I whispered into the dim room, "Richard, what did you do?" Then, suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the house. A single, abrupt knock from the front door. My eyes flew open, my body going rigid. No one visited me at night. No one had any reason to. I forced myself to stand and walk toward the entryway, each step sluggish, as though my legs waded through water. I paused with my hand hovering over the doorknob, heart pounding against my ribs. Slowly, cautiously, I opened the door. And there, standing under the weak porch light, soaked from the evening rain, was Elena. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes wide with urgency. She looked nothing like the calm, reserved woman who used to clean my home. She looked terrified, and the first words she spoke were a whisper that made my blood run cold. "Senora, you opened the room, didn't you?" Rainwater dripped from Elena's coat, leaving small dark circles on my welcome mat as she stood trembling beneath the porch light. Her eyes darted past me into the house, scanning the shadows as though expecting something, someone, to emerge. I stepped aside slowly, unsure whether to let her in or send her away, but the fear etched on her face made the decision for me. I motioned her inside, closing the door quietly behind us. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, not from the cold but from a terror that seemed to hollow out her very breath. The silence between us stretched thin, pulsing with dread. Finally she spoke. "You touched the key." My heart lurched. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if pained by my confession. "You weren't supposed to," she murmured. Her accent thickened under stress, her words trembling as though they carried unbearable weight. I felt anger spark beneath my ribs, mixing with fear. "Elena," I said sharply, "you worked in my house for months. You watched me. You left me that note. You knew Richard long before I did. You owe me the truth. She shook her head rapidly, stepping backward as though cornered. The truth is dangerous, Senora. It was meant to stay buried. But her warning only stoked my determination. I led her to the living room, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing, rigid, as though sitting would make her too vulnerable. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor, unable to meet mine. Tell me, I insisted, my voice firmer now. She swallowed hard, her jaw trembling. Richard trusted no one, she said quietly. Not after what happened. Not after her. The woman in the photograph. The woman with the same initial, E. My breath caught, but I forced myself to remain composed. Who was she? I asked. Elena hesitated, her fingers knotting together anxiously. My sister, she finally whispered. My knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of that revelation. I steadied myself against the armrest, my voice cracking. Your sister? You mean Richard knew your family? Elena nodded slowly. He loved her. For years. A sharp, splintering pain pierced my chest. I felt my entire world tilt. Betrayal, humiliation, disbelief. Each emotion collided inside me like crashing waves. But Elena lifted her hand gently. It wasn't what you think, she said urgently. She loved him too, yes. But she feared what he was becoming. She feared the secrets he kept. She feared that hidden room. My throat went dry. A cold ache crawled up my spine. What secrets? I whispered. Elena's gaze lifted at last, her eyes gleaming with a sorrow so deep it frightened me. Secrets that killed her. The room spun. My breath faltered. Killed her? What do you mean? Elena looked away, trembling violently. She died in this house, she said. In the basement. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shook my head slowly, unable to reconcile her words with reality. Richard never said he never. But Elena cut me off, her voice rising with desperation. He hid everything. He built that room after she died. He sealed it. He told no one. My hands shook uncontrollably. Why? I asked, barely able to form the word. Elena's voice softened into a whisper that chilled my blood. Because what killed her wasn't supposed to exist. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my lungs. What are you saying? Asked, my voice shaking. Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice to barely more than a breath. There are things your husband studied, things that should have stayed in the dark. My sister found out. She confronted him, and the house changed. My pulse hammered in my ears. Changed how? Elena's eyes filled with tears. Doors closing on their own. Footsteps in rooms with no one. Shadows that didn't belong to either of them. Objects shifting. Whispering. My skin prickled with cold. It started after she found what he hid in that room. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small rosary, clutching it tightly. You open the study. The house woke up. My breath caught. The noise. The shifting walls. The cold. Everything suddenly aligned in a horrifying pattern. Elena stepped closer, gripping my arm with icy fingers. You must not open the hidden room, she warned, her voice trembling violently. If you do, you will release what Richard tried to lock away. I pulled my arm back, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. And what exactly is locked in there? Elena's answer was a whisper barely louder than a breath. The thing that killed my sister. Elena's words lingered in the air long after they left her lips, heavy enough to feel like iron pressing against my chest. The thing that killed my sister. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something more, something that would make sense of the madness she had just unleashed. But she only stood there trembling, clutching her rosary like a lifeline, her eyes filled with a terror that seemed to shimmer beneath the dim living room light. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as paper. Elena, I whispered, you need to tell me everything. Right now. She hesitated, shaking her head, but I stepped closer. Please. I deserve to know what my husband was involved in. She finally sank into the armchair, her breath coming in shaky waves. Richard was a man of science, she began. But he was also a man of obsession. My sister, her name was Esmeralda, met him years before you knew he even existed. They worked together. My chest tightened. Worked where? Elena rubbed her temples. At a research facility outside the city. Not government, not private, something in between. They studied things most people don't even know how to name. Her voice grew softer, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Unexplained phenomena. Patterns. Energy shifts. Things that shouldn't exist in our reality.
I felt my knees weaken.
Richard had told me he worked in logistics. In numbers. In boring systems nobody cared to ask about. He had always brushed off questions, always smiled in that gentle way and said, "Oh, Margaret, you'd fall asleep if I explained it." But now, hearing Elena speak, I remembered the nights he'd come home pale and sweating. The nights he'd lock himself in the study, muttering calculations under his breath. The nights I heard him whispering on the phone. It all came back like shards of broken glass, slicing through years of complacency. My voice cracked as I asked, what were they researching? Elena clasped her hands together, staring at the floor.
Doors, she said.
Not physical ones. Dimensional ones. Rifts in space where energy behaves in ways we don't understand. Esmeralda believed the house was built on one. A weak spot. I felt the room spin. A weak spot. Elena nodded. She told Richard the place felt wrong. Alive in a way it shouldn't be. She wanted to close it. But Richard, he wanted to study it. Her voice trembled. Study what came through it. A cold wave rushed through me so violently that I had to grip the back of the sofa to keep myself upright. Are you telling me, I whispered, that something from another dimension is in my basement? Elena's eyes filled with tears. It sounds insane.
I know.
But I saw what it did to my sister. She took a shaky breath. She went down there one night after hearing noises. Richard tried to stop her. He told her it was dangerous. But she went anyway. Elena's voice cracked, grief spilling through the words like water through broken glass. I found her the next morning in the basement. Her body looked wrong, twisted, as if she had seen something so horrifying it broke her from the inside. I pressed my hand to my mouth, ball rising in my throat. Richard told the authorities it was an accident, she continued.
A fall.
But he lied. He sealed the room after that. He locked it away. The house seemed to grow colder with each second. The walls tightened, the shadows deepened, and somewhere beneath us the floor creaked, softly, deliberately. Elena stiffened, her eyes widening. She leaned closer to me and whispered, "It reacts to attention, to curiosity. That's why Richard warned you. That's why he tried to keep you safe." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and burning. My husband, the man I had trusted with my entire life, had been living in terror. And he had kept me in the dark to protect me from something unfathomable. My voice trembled. "So why are you here, Elena? Why come now?" Her answer was a whisper that made every hair on my arms stand on end. "Because the moment you opened the study, it woke up again. And it knows you're looking for it." Elena's words clung to me like frost. "It knows you're looking for it." I stood frozen in the center of the living room, feeling as though the air itself had thickened. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. No, it felt charged, humming faintly beneath the surface like an animal growling behind a closed door. Elena pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, her eyes glossy with fear. I wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to make sense of the madness unraveling before me, but before I could speak, the lamp beside us flickered.
Once. Twice.
Then steadied into a low, buzzing glow. Both of us stared at it, breath held tight in our chests. The house had never flickered like that. Not once in all the years I lived there. Elena stepped closer to me, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads dug into her skin. "It senses movement," she whispered. "Changes. Shifts in energy." Her voice shook as she scanned the corners of the room. "When the rift opens, even a little, the house reacts." My stomach twisted.
The rift.
The very word felt wrong, like a violation of everything I understood about reality.
The study.
The hidden room. The basement that felt colder than it should. Suddenly, pieces I had tried to ignore began to click together. The shifting door, the turned key, the heavy thud behind the wall.
It wasn't just memory.
It wasn't grief or imagination. Something was moving inside my home. Something that didn't belong to this world. A sudden gust of air swept through the hallway, slamming a picture frame against the wall. The noise cracked through the silence like a scream. I jumped, my heart racing. Elena stumbled back, crossing herself quickly, her breath shallow and panicked. "It's getting stronger," she whispered. "It feeds on attention, on fear." She turned to me, her voice rising in urgency. "You have to leave this house tonight, Senora. If you stay, it will try to reach you, just like it reached her." Her voice broke on the last word, her sister. I felt torn in half. Part of me wanted to run out the front door, never looking back. But another part, the older, stubborn part, refused to leave my own home in fear of something I didn't understand. "I'm not leaving," I said softly, though my voice quivered. "Not without answers." Elena stared at me with desperation, but she didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed my wrist. "Then you must listen to me carefully." She pointed toward the basement door at the end of the hallway. "The hidden room, it's not just a space. It's a container, a seal, and it isn't fully closed anymore. There are cracks forming, small ones, but enough for it to push through." I swallowed hard. Elena shook her head. "I don't know what to call it. A presence. A force. A thing that never should have crossed into this world." Her voice dropped. "Esmeralda thought it wasn't alive in the way we understand life. More like a shadow of something from elsewhere." I felt the floor vibrate faintly beneath us, a slow, creeping tremor that made my chest tighten. Elena's eyes widened. She grabbed my other wrist with both hands this time. "Do not go into that room," she pleaded. "Not alone. Not ever. What's inside is drawn to you now. It senses your connection to Richard. It will try to pull you in." My throat tightened painfully. "Why me?" Her answer chilled me to the bone. "Because he spent years studying it, feeding it attention,
Fear.
energy. It knows his name. It knows his presence. And you carry his echo." The lights flickered again, longer this time. The temperature dropped so sharply that my breath came out in pale clouds. Then, from deep below the floorboards, a slow, echoing scrape rose upward, stretching through the walls like a long fingernail dragged across stone. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My heart stuttered violently. I could feel it now, not with my ears or eyes, but with something more primal. A pressure.
A weight.
A presence blooming in the dark belly of the house. Elena whispered hoarsely, "It's awake." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I truly believed her. Because the house was breathing. For a long moment we stood perfectly still, as though any movement might provoke the thing beneath us. The house exhaled again, slow, heavy, like something gathering strength. The floor vibrated faintly under my slippers, and a cold draft drifted up the staircase, as if pulled from the basement by invisible hands. Elena clutched her rosary tighter, whispering a prayer in Spanish under her breath. Her voice trembled uncontrollably. "Está despierto. Dios mío." I felt my chest tighten, my pulse racing in painful, uneven beats. I had never believed in ghosts or monsters. But this was something else entirely. Something that made those words seem childish. Naive. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the hallway, snapping both of our heads toward the basement door. The sound was unmistakable, wood splintering under pressure. My heart lurched into my throat. Elena stumbled backward until she hit the wall, her breath short and frantic. I took a shaky step forward, unable to stop myself from looking. The basement door trembled slightly in its frame, as though something on the other side had pressed against it. Hard. Another crack followed, louder this time. I backed away instinctively, cold terror flooding my veins. "It's trying to push through," Elena whispered. The seal is weakening. Then, as if summoned by her words, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, metal scraping against metal. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The air in the hallway thickened, vibrating like a plucked string. Elena grabbed my arm, digging her nails into my skin. Do not look directly at it, she said, her voice sharp with panic. Do not let it see you. The doorknob stopped halfway, held in an unnatural frozen position that made the hairs on my arms rise. Then came a low groan, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the house itself. A sound no human throat could ever make. Before we could react, the basement door swung open on its own. Not violently, not with force, but slowly, eerily, like a host inviting guests into a feast. Cold, heavy air spilled out, carrying with it a faint metallic smell that made my stomach churn. Elena dragged me behind her, positioning herself between me and the opening. Do not move, she whispered fiercely. Whatever you do, don't speak. My lungs burned as I forced myself to stay silent, to stay still. A faint scraping sound echoed from below, moving slowly across the floor. Something was climbing the stairs. The shadows at the bottom of the staircase shifted, elongating, twisting, as if stretching themselves. My throat tightened painfully. The flashlight I still held flickered in my hand. Elena slapped it off, her eyes wide with terror. Light attracts it, she mouthed. I swallowed hard, my entire body shaking. The scraping grew louder, closer. My heart pounded so violently that I feared it would give me away. Then suddenly everything went still. The house fell silent, unnervingly, impossibly silent. Even the air seemed to freeze. And then a whisper.
Soft.
Familiar.
Terrifying.
Margaret. I felt my blood run cold. My husband's voice. Richard's voice, echoing up from the darkness, like a memory dragged through broken glass. Elena stiffened beside me, her breath catching in her throat. It imitates, she whispered hoarsely. It uses the voices of the ones we love. Tears welled in my eyes as the voice called again, gentle, pleading, exactly as he used to say my name when he wanted me to come closer. Margaret, come down. My knees buckled. The ache of grief, guilt, and longing slammed into me with brutal force. But the terror underneath it was sharper. This was not my husband. This was something wearing his voice like a mask. The whisper grew distorted, too low, then too high, then layered with something hollow and ancient beneath it. Come, come. Elena grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard. Do not listen, she cried in a whisper that trembled with desperation. It wants you to open the seal completely. The scraping resumed. Faster now. Closer. Something was ascending the stairs, something unseen, but undeniably real. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream as the air pressure shifted, a cold wind rushing upward like the house itself was inhaling. Then, with a sudden violent slam, the basement door swung shut, hard enough to rattle the walls. Elena gasped, stumbling backward. I leaned against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, my breath ragged and uneven. We stared at the door, listening for another sound, another whisper, but none came. Only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. After a long moment, Elena turned to me with eyes full of dread. It's getting stronger, she whispered. And soon, the door won't close itself. We stood there for what felt like hours, listening to the empty, quiet pressing against the walls. My heartbeat thudded so loudly it echoed in my ears, drowning out every rational thought I tried to cling to. The basement door, now still, looked more like a mouth sealed shut, only temporarily satisfied. Elena wiped her trembling hands on her soaked coat, her gaze never leaving the doorknob. It won't stop now, she whispered. It's awake. And once it wakes, it remembers. The word remembers made my skin prickle. Houses don't remember, not in the living sense. But this one felt like it had always been waiting for something. Waiting for me. I backed away slowly, gripping the wall for support. My legs felt weak, rubbery, as though the very ground beneath me had shifted. Maybe it had. I kept seeing the hidden room in my mind, the seam in the concrete, the cold air, the silver key still lying on the table upstairs. "What does it want?" I asked, my voice thin and unsteady. Elena hesitated. Her jaw clenched, as though holding back a truth she didn't want to say. Finally, she whispered, "It wants what it always wants when the seal weakens connection. A host. A mind to pull into itself." My breath hitched. A host? Elena nodded grimly. "It tried with Esmeralda. And Richard. And now that their ties to the house are gone, it's reaching for the next closest echo." The next closest echo?
Me.
Of course. I had lived with Richard longer than anyone. His scent still lingered on his armchair. His voice still echoed in the halls of my memories. If this thing, this presence, fed on familiarity, then I was the perfect target. The idea sent a tremor through me so violent I had to clench my fists to steady myself. "Why didn't Richard tell me?" I asked, tears burning in my eyes. "Why didn't he warn me? Protect me?" Elena's expression softened with something like pity. "He loved you," she said gently. "That's exactly why he hid it. The more you know, the closer it gets." A hollow ache opened in my chest, sharp and suffocating. All those nights Richard locked himself in the study, all the fear I mistook for work stress, all the distance that grew between us, it wasn't neglect. It was sacrifice. He had been fighting this thing alone, trying to keep me safe. And I, ignorant, naive, had walked straight into the trap by opening the door he had warned me never to touch. I pressed my palms to my eyes, forcing back tears. The weight of guilt settled over me like a heavy cloak, pressing my spine down. "I should have listened," I whispered. "I should never have opened that room." But Elena shook her head quickly. "It was going to wake eventually," she said, her voice trembling. "The seal weakens over time. Richard slowed it, but he didn't stop it. Opening the study only accelerated what was already coming." She sighed shakily, rubbing her temples. "This house has been thinning for years. Walls don't behave normally. Time feels strange. Shadows linger where they shouldn't." Her voice dropped. "The rift learns from every person who lives here. It adapts." My heart pounded. Adapts how? Elena's gaze flicked toward the staircase, her voice barely a whisper. "It becomes what you fear most. And what you miss most." A pressure built behind my ears, like a slow, aching throb. I swallowed hard. Richard's voice calling my name from the basement. The trembling floorboards, the cold drafts, the sense of being watched even in empty rooms. It all made horrifying sense. The house wasn't just haunted. It was reactive. Sentient in a way that defied everything I understood about the world. And now that I'd touched the key, opened the study, read the journal, it had locked onto me like a predator catching a scent. Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Tonight, it will try again. They're always strongest the first night after awakening." My stomach twisted. "What do we do?" Elena grabbed my shoulders, her eyes fierce with determination despite her terror. "We don't let it separate us. It thrives when its target is alone." She looked toward the hallway, the long, shadow-filled corridor that led to the basement, the study, the cracks in the walls of my life. "We stay together, no matter what we hear." Her voice wavered. "No matter who it imitates." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "Even if it sounds like Richard?" Elena squeezed my hand tightly. "Especially then." A low vibration hummed through the floorboards, subtle, but unmistakable. The house had heard us. It was listening, waiting. And as we stood shoulder to shoulder in the dim living room, I felt something shift in the air again, as though the walls were leaning closer. Remembering. Night fell like a curtain of iron. The kind of night that swallows sound, that presses against windows like a thick, suffocating fog. Elena and I sat together in the living room, every lamp turned off, every curtain drawn tight. She insisted darkness offered better protection, less energy for it to latch onto, fewer reflections for it to twist and distort. I didn't want to believe her, but after what we had witnessed, disbelief felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. We sat side by side in silence, listening to the house breathe around us. Every creak, every groan felt intentional, aware. Around midnight, the temperature began to drop again. Not gradually, not naturally, but suddenly, so fast that my breath puffed out in white clouds. Elena tensed, gripping my arm. "It's close," she whispered. Her rosary beads clinked softly as her fingers shook. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart hammered wildly against my ribs. The walls around us seemed to tighten, as though the house itself were exhaling long, icy breaths. The fireplace crackled faintly behind us, then went out with a hiss, as if smothered by invisible hands. Elena muttered a prayer through clenched teeth. A low rumble traveled beneath the floorboards, this time deeper, more deliberate. I grabbed the edge of the sofa, my nails digging into the fabric. Is it coming up?" I whispered. Elena didn't answer. She was staring at the hallway, her eyes wide, fixed, terrified. I followed her gaze and felt every muscle in my body lock in place. The basement door was vibrating. Not shaking violently, but pulsing gently, rhythmically, like something inside was pushing against it in slow, steady waves. Each pulse made the wood bow inward, then release, inward, then release. My skin crawled. It didn't look like an object. It looked like a heartbeat. The first bang came without warning, so loud, so sudden, that I cried out and clutched my chest. Elena jumped to her feet, breathing hard. "Don't move," she hissed. The second bang followed immediately, harder, cracking the top of the frame. A splinter shot across the hallway like a tiny dart. I screamed before I could stop myself. Another bang. Another. The door buckled violently, as though something enormous slammed against it from the other side. The entire house shook. A picture fell from the wall and shattered on the floor. My pulse roared in my ears. "It's going to break through," I cried. Elena grabbed my hands, squeezing with surprising strength. "Stay with me. Do not go near it." Then everything stopped. The door stilled. The vibrations ceased. The house fell eerily silent. For a moment I hoped it was over. But Elena's face remained pale, her lips pressed so tightly they nearly disappeared. "It's not done," she whispered. "It's thinking." My chest tightened. "Thinking?" She nodded slowly. "It changes tactics when force doesn't work." I opened my mouth to respond, but then a soft knock echoed from the front door. We both froze. The knock came again, gentle, polite, horribly familiar. 3 soft taps, spaced evenly. My breath hitched. Elena stepped in front of me, shaking her head violently. "Do not answer," she whispered. "Do not speak." The knock came a third time, louder. Then the voice that shattered me. "Margaret, it's me." Richard's voice.
Clear. Warm.
Heartbreaking. My knees buckled and I fell against the sofa, tears bursting from my eyes as if someone had ripped open a wound inside me. "Richard?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Elena spun toward me, eyes wide with terror. "And oh," she snapped in a harsh whisper, "that is not your husband." But the voice came again, trembling with emotion. "Please, love, open the door. I'm cold. I'm hurt." Everything inside me twisted painfully. I had dreamed of hearing his voice again. I had ached for it, longed for it, and hearing it now so close, so real, nearly broke me. I reached out instinctively toward the hallway. Elena grabbed my wrist, so hard I cried out. "It's lying," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "It knows what you feel. It knows what you lost." The voice outside the door shifted, warping, stretching, lowering into a guttural, fractured tone that made my blood freeze. "Let me in." The doorknob rattled violently. The windows shuddered. The lights flickered. Elena dragged me backward as the front door bowed inward, bending like soft clay. "It's trying to break its way to you," she cried. "It wants you to open the final seal." I pressed both hands to my ears as the voice morphed again, becoming a twisted, monstrous echo of my husband's final words. "Margaret, please." And just when I thought I would faint, the house went silent again.
Completely.
Utterly. as if the night itself had swallowed all sound. Elena slowly released my wrist, her breathing ragged. We stared at the front door, both of us too afraid to move. After a long, torturous moment, she whispered, "It will try again, and next time it won't knock." The silence after the last attack felt even more dangerous than the noise. It was the kind of silence that didn't belong to night or houses or anything natural. It was deliberate, watching, calculating. Elena and I sat close together on the living room floor, our backs pressed against the sofa as though we needed something solid behind us to keep from being pulled backward into the dark. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my throat, in my temples. The house was too still, so still it made every exhale feel like a risk. Elena whispered, "It's choosing its next path." I didn't ask what that meant. I knew. It was deciding how to reach me. The floorboards shifted beneath us, just one soft creak, but it was enough to make us both stiffen. Then another, this time from a hallway. Elena grabbed my hand, squeezing until her nails pressed into my skin. "Don't move," she breathed. The creaks came slowly, methodically, like footsteps. Not heavy ones.
Light.
Almost curious. They stopped just outside the living room door. I held my breath, so long my chest hurt. Something was standing there. Something that had no reason to mimic the sound of feet, unless it wanted us to imagine a body attached to them. Then the hallway light flickered on.
Off. On. Off.
Each pulse brighter than the last, as though the electricity itself was struggling under some unnatural pressure. Elena pressed her forehead against mine and whispered, "It's testing boundaries." I felt myself trembling uncontrollably. "What does it want?" I asked, barely forming the words. She swallowed hard. "To be seen."
To be acknowledged.
"And then to be let in." My stomach twisted painfully, remembering the voice at the door. The gentle knock. The pleading tone. The distorted anger beneath it. It didn't want to kill me. Not at first.
No.
It wanted connection.
Control.
A host. My mind. We remained still until the footsteps retreated down the hall. I exhaled shakily, feeling sweat trickle down the back of my neck. Elena stood suddenly, pulling me up with her. "We can't wait for it to choose the moment," she said. "We have to close the seal before it fully crosses." My heart dropped. "You mean go back to the basement?" Her expression hardened with grim resolve. "It's the only way." I shook my head violently. "Elena, we barely survived being upstairs. How are we supposed to face it down there?" Her eyes met mine, fierce and determined. "Because it's weaker when it's spread through the house. Down there, it's focused.
Contained.
We have one chance." My hands shook as we approached the basement door again. The wood still bore the cracks from the earlier assault. Elena took a deep breath, placed her hand near the knob, and whispered a prayer. The air around us seemed to thicken with anticipation. I gripped her coat tightly. What if it's waiting for us? She didn't look back. "It is." The doorknob felt ice-cold against her fingers. She turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing the staircase swallowed in thick darkness. A foul smell drifted upward, metallic, damp, ancient. I gagged. Elena tightened her grip on my arm. "Stay behind me, no matter what we hear." We began descending. Each step groaned under our weight, and every sound echoed unnaturally, stretching into long, distorted whispers. The flashlight Elena held flickered weakly, as though drained by the air itself. When we reached the bottom, I felt the presence before I saw anything, a cold pressure pressing against my chest, like an unseen hand. The hidden door in the concrete wall was no longer subtle. The seam glowed faintly, pulsing like a vein. The silver key in my pocket vibrated gently, as though drawn to the light. I gasped and grabbed it. The moment I touched it, the entire basement hummed. Elena turned to me, eyes wide with fear and urgency. "You must lock it," she whispered. "Only you. It recognizes your presence." Richard's echo. My heart hammered. What if it pulls me in? Her voice cracked, but she didn't hesitate. "Then I'll pull you back." I stepped forward, legs trembling. The glowing seam brightened, and a deep rumble shook the walls. A shadow pressed from behind the concrete, stretching like a hand reaching outward. A whisper followed, soft, familiar, devastating. Margaret, Richard's voice. Again. My knees buckled. Don't listen. Elena cried. Use the key. With shaking hands, I pressed the silver key against the glowing seam. There was no keyhole, yet the concrete shifted, softening under the metal like flesh. A violent cold rushed up my arm. I felt something grab my mind, something vast and hungry, pulling, trying to drag me into itself. I screamed. Elena wrapped her arms around my waist, anchoring me. Turn it, she shouted.
Now.
Summoning every ounce of strength left in my soul, I twisted the key. A blinding flash erupted. The hidden room emitted a guttural howl, not a scream of pain, but of rage. The shadow recoiled violently. The pressure crushed my chest, then released. The glowing seam sealed shut. The rumble stopped. The cold receded. The basement fell silent. Utterly, beautifully silent. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. Elena knelt beside me, trembling but alive. You did it, she whispered. It's closed. We stared at the now lifeless wall, the seal no longer glowing. Just concrete.
Solid. Still.
Quiet. And for the first time in weeks, the house did not breathe. It simply rested. Elena pressed her forehead to the ground and whispered, Gracias a Dios. I leaned against the cold wall, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if the seal would hold forever. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The presence was contained. The truth was revealed. And whatever lived in the hidden dark beneath my home would never take me, not while I was still alive.